Hello, my name is Dick Shilts, and this is just a conversation.
So if you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. My first question is, who is your NBA greatest of all time?
Huh. Huh. That's an interesting question. I think I think it's shameful sometimes that we have to compare the great players, but we all do it. Uh,
Hmm.
we get caught up in that comparison trap. I think you can make cases for about five or six players, and then I think you have to qualify what you mean by great player, most valuable player to a team. I would probably say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Uh, as greatest individual player in terms of playing defense, rebounding, passing, shooting, quickness, all of those things. I personally would choose Michael Jordan.
What was growing up like before you even got into coaching? What was just childhood like?
Well, I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, New Paris, Ohio, that was 6 miles east of the Indiana border. Richmond, Indiana was a town then of about 40,000. It's a town now of about 40,000. Um, that was the closest hospital. So I was born in actually in Indiana, but I lived in Ohio all those years. Um, the school I went to was a K through 12. So we had kindergartners and seniors at the same building. And that school was just torn down a couple of years ago. And the city paid, the village paid a dollar for it and converted it into a park so where kids could play. So, but we had 37 students in my graduating class. Um, only seven of us attempted to go to college. Three of us made it through college. The rest, most of them stayed around New Paris, and some of them still live there today. Of course, at my age now, that many of them are passing away, which is so they're not there anymore. But a good friend of mine and a teammate that was just 2 years ahead of me just died the other day, and but it was everything about it was small town. And when I had a chance to listen to, first it was Frank Shannon, who was, we grew up in a little Methodist church there, attending that. My mom was very regular in church going, and dad was not involved in church. Mom and dad got a divorce after 25 years of marriage. And mom was raised in a Baptist church, but the church we went to in New Paris, there was a Baptist church, but we somehow they started going when we were kids to the Methodist church. So I met my wife in the ninth grade. We got married in that church, which is still there today. Average attendance on a Sunday morning is probably 25 people now. Um, but when Frank Shannon came to speak at our athletic banquet after my junior season, I was pretty convinced that I wanted to go to Ohio Wesleyan, which is a Methodist school. It was in Delaware, Ohio. And then the next year, this school named Wittenberg University had just won. In those days, there were only two divisions in the NCAA, the small college and major college. And Wittenberg had just won in 1961, the year I graduated from high school. They had just won the national championship in small college. So their coach was a man named Ray Mears, Mears, and he was traveling around, particularly Ohio, but even in other states, very much in demand as a speaker at banquets and father son, that kind of thing. So he spoke, and I was glued to what he said. Um, his motivation, his anyway, I was persuaded all of a sudden to go to this Lutheran college that had just won a national title. And I found out when I visited the Lutheran college that I liked it. Half of the students that were there were not Lutheran, so I felt comfortable there and attended Wittenberg University for 4 years. Ray Mears coached me for 1 year. I was on the JV team as a freshman, and then he was offered. They had never lost a game at home. He was there 6 years, and he was offered the head coaching job at University of Tennessee. So he went to Tennessee, and one of his players was a man named Eldon Miller. And Eldon became, at 22 years of age, the youngest head basketball coach in America. They offered him the job. Eldon had been there 1 year as a grad assistant. And so I actually played my 3 years for Eldon. Um, I didn't start till I was a senior, and I had injuries in my senior year that took me out of, I think it ended up being about 12 of the 24 games that we had on our schedule. Um, I was able to start when I was starting. I joke about it today. I brought some sense back to the people in Springfield, Ohio, because we finally lost after 69 straight wins at home when I was starting. So uh, it was it was an interesting experience. We lost to Central State. I point out to people that that was a school mainly African American players, and they ended up going 32-0 that year. So they beat a lot of other teams, and they beat us at home, and they won the national championship in the NAIA division. So that was my experience. I was influenced greatly in my coaching by Ray Mears, but a lot of the influence was things that I didn't want to do. But as well as I learned how to understand why he said what he did. And my best definition of him would be he was a Bobby Knight without the foul language. But the things he believed were things that you might hear Bobby Knight say. I've read almost every book I can on Bobby Knight, because my first coaching job was at Wadsworth High School in Ohio. I was a JV coach, and Bobby Knight had just graduated from Orville, which was 6 miles away. So Bobby Knight went to Ohio State. He was a substitute at Ohio State when I was basically a substitute at Wittenberg. And he had just gone on to uh, Duke, or actually went to Army first. Mike Krzyzewski was coaching him with him at Army. And Bobby Knight he was known then, Caleb, as the master of defensive basketball. I mean, in those days, if you wanted to have a speaker at a clinic anywhere in America, to talk about defense, you would have Bobby Knight. Um, the Wadsworth team I had my first year of my second year at Wadsworth, I was offered the head job. The varsity team had been 2-17 2 years in a row. Um, so it was a perfect situation to go into, because if you're just average, you're going to be better than they were. And we were picked last in the league. It was a very, very weak league that only had 6 teams in it. We finished 11-7 overall, and we won the conference. We were 6-0 in the conference that year. So all of a sudden, I was probably lauded as being a lot better coach than I was. And people were sorry for me going into the season because we'd had those losing years and everybody had graduated. And I used to tell people, I guess if you're a coach and you're going into a situation like that, that's these players that graduated were 4-34 in their last 38 games. That's probably the best time that you want to go in and bring your players up from the JV to play varsity. So we won 2 conference championships, and then I had a chance to go to Akron University to continue working on my master's degree. And I was assistant JV coach there 1 year and assistant varsity for 1 year. And then Eldon Miller asked me to come to Western Michigan. So in 1970, I came to Kalamazoo. Well, that's a quick history of where I went and why. My wife and I met her in the ninth grade when she was traveling around. Her dad was a draftsman in those days. They traveled to different areas for different drafting jobs. Of course, they used a slide rule in those days and things that students today probably won't even know what they were. But when she came to our school in the ninth grade, we started talking as boyfriend, girlfriend, probably around my sophomore, junior year. And then we decided when I went off to college, she took a job in Richmond at Richmond Record Pressings. That's when they used to have the 45 records, and she was in a key punching thing where she punched the things, and it's just a whole different world that we lived in. And when we decided as boyfriend and girlfriend, we broke up 2 or 3 times, and then about my senior year in college, we got pretty serious, and we said, well, I wasn't going to get married until I had a job. So I got the job opportunity. The times were so different. They needed an English teacher. I majored in English. So when I went to Wadsworth to interview, I had several things in my favor. I had the athletic director was the father of one of my teammates at Wittenberg, so he knew me. Um, and there was a shortage of English teachers, especially male English teachers in America at that time. They asked me to come up for an interview, and I was interviewed and was offered the job. So my ability to get into there is so different than what students I've coached in the last 30, 40 years, even because the job opportunities were not the same. Although now teaching jobs are becoming available a lot more now because people are getting out, but so I was able to, they wanted an English teacher, sophomore English. That was right up my alley. And they wanted a basketball coach, and they would like to have those two positions combined. So I did that. I coached a cross country team as well and was the head coach at Wadsworth, I said, for 2 years before going to Akron University.
I'm curious how you got into basketball because basketball back then is not what it is today. So how did you I really don't know. Were they on TV? I know they were tape delayed, but I don't how did you get into basketball and want to pursue that?
That's a really interesting question, KO, because as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a basketball coach. We went out back. We had a basket in our backyard. For a while, it was a muddy area. And when it would freeze over in the wintertime, we hoped it froze enough that it wouldn't be sloshy and muddy so we could bounce a basketball on it. And I was involved with kids that like to play basketball. So my brother-in-law was 2 years ahead of me in school, actually 3 years ahead of me. And when the older guys would play a pickup game, they included me. And he spoke up for me, even though I was maybe an eighth grader or seventh grader and he was in high school. He said, let him play. He's not going to hurt us. So they included me, and I enjoyed playing. I just developed a love for the game. Every waking moment that I had, I'd go out back. I even would go out back and I would pretend that I was a radio broadcaster and I was broadcasting Cincinnati with Oscar Robertson playing Ohio State with Jerry Lucas. And those two teams actually met in a national championship game. And so I had developed Oscar's shot was always over his right shoulder, or Oscar's was actually more out in front, and Lucas's was on the right shoulder. And so I knew how they shot the ball, and I would go out and play a game. I would announce the game, and I would take the last shot, and if it went in, Ohio State won. Cincinnati won. If it didn't go in, then Ohio State won. I just was fascinated with basketball, and Mom encouraged it. I think that the fact that she had my friends over all the time, and she didn't mind them going out back and playing basketball with me, and she knew it was keeping me home and keeping me out of trouble. So I think her welcoming, she would make cookies or invite people in for supper if they hadn't had supper. And it was just a very congenial neighborhood atmosphere. But it really, as I've gone through the years now, I've seen how important it is to be accepted, and to have a sense of belonging because they could have just told me, hey, he's too little, get him out of here. He's bothering us. But they didn't. And I had an advocate. I had a brother-in-law that's still alive today. He's 85 years old.
What was your experience like coaching at Western?
Oh, Western was it was a great experience. When I came in 1970, we still had JV teams, and I coached 1 year of JV basketball. And it was interesting because we couldn't practice as a team every day because I was in the varsity practice. So we set up what we called a fundamental workout where they went in another gymnasium in the old Gary Center, and they would actually go through 10 design drills, and it would take them about 40 minutes. And then when we played a game, they hadn't practiced together the whole week. They'd just done their individual drills. And that team I had that first year was 9-1. Made me kind of think about maybe we in this coaching thing, we make it a little too complicated. If you have good enough players, and they get along and they play together, they might do a lot more with a lot less practice time than we make them have. But um, as an assistant coach for 6 years, things were very tough back in 1970. Um, Black students didn't stand for the national anthem. They sat together. There was a lot of animosity in the Kalamazoo community about that. Um, we had we had a white player from Grand Rapids that had started the year before, and the coach got fired. And there was a black nationalist movement on campus that thought the coach was racist in his decision making and stuff. So when Eldon Miller and I came here, we had nothing to do with any of that, but we were faced with the backlash. There were white people that felt that the president caved in. James Miller was the president at that time, and he hired Eldon because when we first started at Western, I think the first several games that we played when I was a JV assistant varsity coach, we had 5 black starters. And so a lot of white people said, well, he's just playing them now because that's what the president wanted. And then I thought it was always interesting because one of our black players got in trouble and had to miss a few games. And we put a white player, a guy named John Spurla, that scored 44 in a high school tournament game at Flint St. Matthews, one of the toughest competitors we'd ever had. But we started him, and then all the letters of dissent came from the black community because we were caving in to the whites who wanted a white player there. So that we lived through that. Of course, that was just after the time the Kent State shootings. King was assassinated in '68. So all of that stuff, we came into it. And the first year we had a 14-10 team. So people were kind of happy that we finally won more than we lost. And then the second year we went 10-14. And then the third year we had a disaster. We went 8-18. And there were people that wanted us fired, wanted the staff gone. Then the next year we went 14-10. Or no, we went 16-10 with that same group of starters. And then that senior year, that Tyson and Griffin and Curzon and Harvey, those guys went 25-3 and made the Sweet 16. So all of a sudden, Eldon Miller went from he's not a big time coach, he's a small time coach, to signs. I remember driving around Kalamazoo and there were signs on the billboards and at motels and stuff that said Eldon Miller for president. So we went through the tough times and then we got to the top, and then Eldon went to Ohio State. He asked me to go with him. I told him if I didn't get the job at Western, I would. So if they were going to open it up and interview other candidates, then I wouldn't stay. And he told the athletic director that. And he said, if you want Dick to stay, you need to ask him because he's going to come with me if you open the job up. So we had simultaneous press conferences. He got hired at Ohio State in Columbus. We had a press conference the same day and the same time in Kalamazoo announcing that I was the new head coach at Western. Unfortunately for me, that success that we'd had, the people in Kalamazoo thought that we were now a power. We should beat Michigan State, and Michigan. And so we were getting them on the schedule. And we had a 2-week period where my first year as head coach, we played Michigan State, Marquette, and Michigan. And the breather was Miami, who was a powerhouse in the MAC, and that too. So my first year, we went 14-13. We actually beat Michigan State at Michigan State. That was the year before Magic went there. They got us back the next year with Magic. They embarrassed us at home. We were drawing about 1,500, 1,800 people at our games, and when Magic came to town, we sold out Reed Fieldhouse. So I don't think they were there to see the Broncos play, but it was a great experience having a chance to coach that there. And then I had the 2 years, 77, 70, 78, 79, no, 77, 78, 78, 79. We were 7-20 and 7-23. So I got fired in 79. They asked me if I wanted to resign so they wouldn't have to publicize it as a firing. And I told him, no, I wanted to speak to the president. That's a whole political issue that I don't want to get into it. I don't want to relive that, but um, when I left Western, I was very fortunate to have some good friends through the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And when I was offered, I'd actually played golf with Dale Lake, who was the president at KVCC at the time. And we got to know each other in a Polish American Open down at Old Mill. And that day I thought highly of him. And that was while I was still coaching at Western. When I got let go at Western, Jack Moss and a few other people in the community told Dr. Lake he should get a hold of me. And then he didn't think a Division I coach would want to go to KVCC. So they told him to ask me. So over the next period, I visited schools like Taylor University. I actually was offered the job there. Albion, University of Alberta. Those were ones I actually made trips to and was very interested in going to them. I was one of the two finalists at the University of Alberta, but I'm glad they didn't give it to me because my wife said she was not going to Edmonton, Canada. So, so that turned out well. I don't think I would have gone either, to be honest. But that that job that I ended up having at Kalamazoo Valley was a great blessing, and because it gave me an opportunity. I don't think I realized it right away. It gave me an opportunity to influence the lives of twice as many people. Because when you recruit somebody at Western, you're going to have them 4 years. At Kalamazoo Valley, you're lucky if you have them two. Sometimes you only have them one. Uh, so the number of students in my 32 years at Kalamazoo Valley that I had direct interaction with as coach player was double what I would have had at Western, probably a little more than double, counting all the ones that tried out and everything. Plus, I had the summer basketball camps, and we had thousands of kids over that 32-year period coming to our basketball camps. And I still run into people in their 40s and 50s today that remember our basketball camps. So that's been a great blessing. I think at the time, the administration, even when I was at Western running camps, I remember an administrator coming in and asking me how many of the people that have come to your camp are making your team. And at that point, we didn't have any. And so, but I wasn't looking at camps that way. I was looking at camps as a growth and development experience, for young people. So I don't think they were totally on board. As soon as we started to make money at the camp at Western, they wanted me to run a camp in 6 different sports. And they were looking at $40,000, $50,000 that you could raise. I begged them not to do that to me, that would leave me with basketball, and they did. But when I was at Kalamazoo Valley, Dr. Lake told me, he says, I just want young people to come out on our campus and see what our campus has got and eat a meal in the cafeteria. And so his whole attitude was just totally different he didn't ask me how many people that are going to be in your camp. He didn't expect me to use it as a recruiting tool, but just to use it as an experience to get young people to consider KVCC. So that's the way that whole thing worked out. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that it did that way because I didn't have the constant pressure of the Kalamazoo Gazette calling. That's when we had a Gazette that actually printed articles every day about sports. And if you lose 7 games in a row, like I did at Western 2 years in a row, there's not a whole lot to write about, but they still wanted an article. And when we went to Kalamazoo Valley, if we had 1,500 people, it would be an outstanding crowd. We only filled it once. That's when we were 17-0 and played Lansing. And that night we filled it. We got beat. We got them back at the end of the year down in Dayton, Ohio, in front of about 25 people from Kalamazoo. But the crowds never have been what it's really about. This culture. I just watched Michigan State win earlier today, and watched Wisconsin just blow out. Watched parts of that game where they blew out UCLA. Athletics can be really cruel, but at KVCC, I never felt in any game that I coached there that this game was about getting more people in the gymnasium. It was always about growth and development and what it meant to these players playing and what they could learn from it and how they could take what they learned from it and use it later in their lives.
What's one of the biggest lessons that you learned from your coaching experience at Western that you took into your coaching experience at KVCC?
There isn't just one way to do something that, in the Isaac group, we call it binary thinking. And I think I was guilty of that a lot because that's the way Ray Mears was. That's the way I was taught. There's two ways to do something, his way and the wrong way, and I just came to believe that my last year at Kalamazoo Valley, we made the national tournament and I played a 2-3 zone defense the entire game. And in all my 32 years at Valley, I never played a 2-3 zone for the entire game. I'd play it maybe a couple of times after a timeout just to throw a team off or whatever, but I did it. And as it was working in the first half, I said to myself something that I had learned in those years. Don't be afraid to change. I mean, don't be afraid. You're known as a man-to-man defensive coach, but they only have one 3-point shooter on the floor, the little point guard that's driving around everybody. We don't have anybody can stop him from driving in there. And we did have 6'9", 6'8", and 6'6" on the front line. So if he drove in there, we had some big hands that go up and they could make it difficult for him to score. He was not a good outside shooter. So we backed away from him, played that zone, dared him to shoot. He was like 2 for 13 in that game, and it worked. And we won by 25 or so points. So one of the things and I think back on that, I think I had learned that maybe 10 years earlier, that even if you're adamant that this is the best way to do something, it's okay to try a different way. And maybe it won't work out, but you won't know if it'll work out until you try it. And then when I got into some of the things that we do in Isaac, it's like, wow, I was taught this way. I grew up this way. And there's different ways to actually look at this. So that would be one of the lessons. And the other one is I think that athletic competition has to be about building relationships. How it has to be about what I call growth and development. If it's not about that, then we shouldn't be spending that much time and effort doing it. If it's just about winning games, and I never thought I'd be fired in it from a job for losing. I mean, I'd been coaching and playing basketball for 17 years, and I'd never been a part of a losing program. And then I had 720 and 723, and I got fired. And I was just crushed. I mean, I didn't really know if do I even want to keep coaching? I'm such a failure here. Maybe I can't do that anymore. So I went to my pastor. I talked about maybe enrolling in a seminary, and he was very helpful. He said, "Do you feel a specific call to do full time clergy work?" And I said, "No." He said, "Then you don't want to do it." So, uh, but when how that all worked together is when I retired in 2011. I had had some surgeries, so I'd had some time to recover from those surgeries, and I was able to read. And I started reading Taylor Branch's books, Parting the Waters, The Pillar of Fire, at Canaan's Edge. They were all 800 plus page books. And when you're recouping from surgery, a stent or whatever it is, hip surgery, you've got time. I mean, you can't do anything else. You're told to do some exercises and stay there and rest. So one of the books that I read was Lies My Teacher Told Me. And when I read that book, I thought, oh my gosh. And then I had a retired pastor from one of our church groups, Jerry Toshalis, and Jerry said, if you read Howard Zenn's book, A People's History of the United States, it'll change your life. And I had so much respect for him. I read the book and it did. It was the history of America through the eyes of indigenous people. And it was so in contrast with what I'd been taught all along. And then I learned about who, as you've heard in Isaac, I learned about who picked the textbooks. And I learned that the Texas Department of Education was regarded nationally as being so, and who wrote the books. And it's the people in power that wrote the books. and they could cover up anything that they wanted to cover up, anything that helped them keep power. And I started thinking more and more like maybe this a whole of life is I got to get away from this feeling that there's only one thing that matters. And when you're raised in a little Christian church, the one thing that matters is that you give your life to Jesus Christ. If you give your life to Jesus Christ, then everything else is going to take care of itself. And I used to give talks all the time. I would say it doesn't make it a rose garden. You're going to have trials and temptations even after you give your life. And I said all those things, um, but I don't think I really realized that there's a lot more to what's in Scripture, and there's a lot more to life in uh, just living a certain way and caring about people and not just saying that everything's okay because I gave my life to Christ. I do need to tell you too, I want to tell you how I got started in the Isaac work, how I made a decision to get involved in Isaac. Um, there's a friend of mine that I played basketball with a lot, much younger than I am, named Harold Swift. He's got a PhD now. He was working on his master's degree. His master's degree was about why there weren't more Black athletic directors and head coaches throughout the country. And the disparity was very obvious, more so then than it is now, but it's still now. Um, so he asked me one day, we played at Second Reformed Church, and it was nice of him even to let me play because he's so much quicker and so much better. And I could have been his father, and here I am out there, they're accepting me. But Harold says to me, he says, would you mind staying after next week? And we set up a day. He says, I would like to interview you um, for my doctoral thesis. He said, you don't have to prepare anything, kind of what you said. Just come and I'll give you the questions. So I told him I would, and I stayed around after we played, and he asked me kind of the questions that you did, only a little bit more detail about how did you get to where you're coaching at Western, and then you end up tell me your story. So I told him about New Paris, and I told him about Wittenberg and Ray Mears and Wadsworth, and then Akron, and then Western. And after we finished it all, I thought it went great. He laughed, he took some notes, and then he says, I have one more question. And you know what I'm going to say. I have one more question. He said, I want to know if you think your life would have been different. This story would have been different had you been born Black. And I remember looking at him and then swallowing a lump in my throat. And I remember I said to him distinctly, he probably remembers this too that day. I said, Harold, every fiber of my body wants to say it would not have been different. But I know just enough. I don't think I know very much, but just enough to say I can't answer that. I really don't know. And then he suggested I read the Taylor Branch books. He said, well, I appreciate that. And I'm sure he put that in his doctoral thesis. A year later, after I'd read that 800-page book, Parting the Waters, I was convinced that that was a stupid answer, and that I saw him at KVCC. We hugged each other, and I said to him, Harold, I now know that my life would have been very different had I been born Black. And he says, I got another book for you to read. And so he was nursing me along uh, and encouraging me.
To that, and then also your coaching. How were you able to, as you got older, not get stuck in your ways and be content with, eh, it works well enough for me that I don't really have to keep evolving and changing. How did you work through that to continue to be where you are?
I think the motivation, and I don't want to say, I don't want to make it sound like I did a really good job of this, because as I look back over my life, I think I probably should have changed sooner and been more willing to change more often. But one of the things that drove me was Ray Mears's approach. When Ray Mears would say, when I recruit he called them boys, he called all of us boys. When I recruit a boy out of high school, um, I don't want somebody that's just competitive. I want somebody that has a fire in them. I want somebody that wants to do something better than it's ever been done before. And he wrote a book entitled It's All in the State of Mind when he was 33 years old. So I had this, I've always had this drive of there's a better way. You don't be settled. Um, when we won a state championship, winning the one the next year back to back is much harder than winning the first one. And um, but I always felt that even though I'm kind of sold on this way of doing things, because if you do things a certain way in athletics and you win, it's hard. It's like the good is the enemy of great. And even people at KVCC would come to me and say, "Well, why do we do it that way?" I said, "Well, that's worked, and so it's hard to change." But they would come back to me and rightly say, "There a better way to do it?" And if you're having success, it's in athletics, then that's not the same as success in these issues in erasing or eliminating or diminishing systemic racism because we're not having success. We're not getting that done. Um, the successes maybe, when people say, well, it's better now than it was 20 years ago, I say, I'm not so sure, but maybe it is. Maybe it is. And you find black people that'll say, yes, it is. It's better than my father had it or my grandfather. And but white people want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about what's left. It's better, but is it good? Is it the way it should be? So I think the desire to do something better has driven me to be open to change. Uh, and as I said, probably not to the extent that it should have. If I had to regret anything, I would probably regret for not being more willing to change. Uh, I'll tell you this, and then you can kind of see where I'm coming from. The most significant basketball clinic I ever attended was a 7-Up clinic in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was my first or second year coaching. It was when I was at Wadsworth. The prime speakers, two of the prime speakers were Ray Mears and John Wooden. And Ray Mears spoke first, and I'm sitting there all proud, 1,000 coaches from all over the country, Midwest primarily. And I'm thinking, I know him. I played a year for him. I got stories about him. And then John Wooden got up 10 minutes later, and John Wooden started in a polite way, as he always was, one by one, giving a different philosophy. So that when Ray Mears said, if that ball is coming through the net and you're warming up, you better not let it come out of the net. You better get it before it comes out of the net. You better be sprinting. So you don't walk under the bucket. And John Wooden says when he was Lou Alcindor then, he said, I was just concerned that when the ball goes up, he's ready. So if he wanted to go shoot around for 10 minutes and then sit on the bench for 10 minutes, and I asked him if he's ready, and he says he is, the test of that is when they toss the ball up, is he ready? And he always looked ready to me. And he played like he was ready. So I began to see that what Ray Mears, this thing of it's my way or the highway, and that was a Bobby Knight thing too. Uh, that's really not the way it is. That's not the way it is in life, even.
I now have some coaching situations that I want to describe the situation to you and hear what your coaching philosophy would be in that situation.
Okay.
So, if you have a player who is doing everything that you think they should be doing, shooting the shots they're supposed to be doing, showing up to practice, playing hard the way they should be doing, and a shot's not falling or they're just not feeling it, how do you coach them to continue to trust that process and not waver because of the ebbs and flows of the results?
I've had several examples of that. We had a player one year from Centerville named Matt Lehman. Actually, he's been on the foundation board at KVCC. Very successful businessman here in banker in the Kalamazoo area. Matt was a terrific shooter in high school, and he came to KVCC. He was on my first team that won a state championship. We were not a good defensive team, but we won 30 games that year and we lost six, and we won our first state championship ever at KVCC. We had a game where, and we used to joke about Matt that he never missed, he never saw a shot he didn't like because he would let it go. He had this shot back over his head, and we had a game. We had a point guard from Kalamazoo Central named Chucky Lewis, and Chucky had 9 assists a game. He was a terrific little player, 5'7", but quick and smart, knew the game. He lives in Charlotte today and still stays in touch with me. Matt Lehman took 7 possessions in a row. He took 7 straight shots and he missed all 7 of them. And we were the kind of team that year, we couldn't guard very well, but it was the first year of the 3-point arc, and I had 7 guys on the team, Caleb, that could shoot the three. So we decided to sub 5 for 5 a lot and to keep fresh players on the floor and to run up and down and let it go. We averaged 100.3 points a game, and we gave up 87 a game. One of my worst defensive teams I had in 32 years, but we won. Again, going back to winning a different way. Chucky Lewis came over to the bench, dribbling the ball while the clock's running. After Matt missed his 7th one, we got the ball back at the other end. And he says, "You want me to keep passing him the ball?" And I said, "You pass him the ball, I'll decide when to take him out." He said, "Okay." So we went down the floor. Matt hit 5 straight shots in the next 10 minutes. So was that the right call? Should I have taken him out sooner? I had confidence in his shot, and he had confidence in his shot. Even our point guard that didn't care about who scored the points, he just wanted to know, for the good of the team, do you want me to pass him the ball anymore? So um, I think that confidence has a lot to do with it. We spent a lot of time, I think my second or third year at KVCC, we only had one gym then. So we had 8 sports, and softball team wanted to use the gym. Uh, they were getting ready for spring season. Baseball team wanted to use it. So we had days where we had an hour and 20 minutes for basketball practice. So I took the players into the room and we listened to audio cassette tapes. Even then that was considered a no-no. And the tapes we listened to were Dennis Waitley, who came to speak. He had a whole group of takes called The Psychology of Winning. And I still think, as we listen to those tapes and then we discussed them, we spent sometimes 45 minutes to an hour because we only could get the gym for an hour and 20 minutes. So I figured we might as well stay in here mentally. Well, that was the team that actually went on to win. And because they had that confidence in each other, and if they stick together and they do these things, even though they couldn't guard somebody, we had Ed Finch was a All-American for us that year. Western didn't think he was good enough. He had a chip on his shoulder to prove to him he was. They still didn't recruit him. And he went to Grand Valley and he scored 72 points against the University of Detroit when he was at Grand Valley. He still couldn't guard anybody very well, and that's why the big schools didn't want him. Uh, but he had a heck of a career at the community college, and then he got his degree from Grand Valley State. So in answer to your question, I think a lot of it is just talking about learning to relax, not putting so much pressure. We called it a relaxed concentration. So that when you're up at the foul line shooting a free throw, we had a kid named Bill Boyle from Delton, and we're playing Highland Park. They have 2 7-footers and they bring a 6'10" off the bench. And that was at a time when you didn't have a shot clock, you didn't have a 3-point arc. So the rule said if you were behind, you had to force the action. So we got Highland Park down early and we just held it midcourt. And we made them come out, and we had 5 guards basically on the floor. So we could drive it to the basket. And so this game comes down to 72-71. We're down 1. He gets fouled. So he's at the foul line, and their coach called 3 timeouts to try to ice him. And he was not a real good free throw shooter. Bill wasn't. We had charts on the keep him every day. He was like 9th on the team or something. And So I just told him to relax. It was like 2 seconds to go. If he makes them both, we win. If he makes one, we got overtime. And the third time out they called, when Bill came over, I said to the guy, I said, I don't have anything else to tell you. No, I said, Bill, I said it so that other players couldn't hear him. I said, I want you to know something. You and I both know you're not a very good free throw shooter, but don't miss it because you're tight and you're worried about what the people are going to think about you. Just relax and shoot the ball. And I'm going to love you tomorrow as much as I love you today, whether you make them or miss them. And he said, he patted me on the shoulder. He said, thanks, coach. He went up, Caleb, and split both of those net. I mean, and we won by 1 point. And when we think back on that story, I think of how what we told him in the Dennis Waitley story, we talked about the motivation that people have. If I took a 2x10 and laid it down on the gym floor and took a $10 bill and put a penny on it, and I told anybody that could step onto that 2x10, 20 feet long, and walk across it without falling off, they could have that $10 bill. And I asked them how many guys would try that. And they said, you're crazy, coach. You're going to lose a lot of money. So I tell them, okay, I want to do the same thing. I want to go 36 stories up in Chicago at a skyscraper that's 10 feet apart, put a 20-foot board down. There's might be a little breeze up there, so we'll have to use the little stone this time or a 50-cent piece or whatever. But I'm going to put a $100 bill on it, and I'm going to ask who's going to be first to walk across that. And then the example that Dennis Waitley was making is how it's necessary to be relaxed when you're doing something and not worry about the outcome. Okay. I asked him how many guys would want to go, and nobody would raise their hand. And I said, how about if it's $500? How about if it's 1,000? And now the guys are kind of thinking, I said, how about 5,000? And usually there's a couple hands go up. But the thing that always amazed me, and Dennis Waitley didn't say this about that story, would be the way that people would walk across it in the gym compared to 36 stories up. You could walk across it in the gym and pick up whatever dollar and laugh at the coach. You could even be laughing while you're walking, saying, this is really easy. And when it's up there, you're not going to laugh and you're not going to walk the same way. You're going to be a little bit this and a little bit that. And because the penalty for failure suddenly is your life. The penalty for failure in the gym is you just don't have that $10.
What do you value more, being in the Michigan Basketball Coaches Association Hall of Fame or having a scholarship named in your honor?
I didn't really coach to achieve either one of those things. It's it's an honor always to be recognized by your peers, and both of those awards are recognition by my peers. So I'm proud of them, but the meaning of what I did is still in the lives of those young people that played for me and how they changed and how Caleb, I could go story after story of I kicked a kid off the team when he lied to me. He told me this teacher had given him this progress report that showed he was passing. I walked straight over to the teacher's office. The teacher said he hadn't seen him all day. He did not do that. I came back and said, if you lie to me, we don't have a relationship. So I kicked him off the team. His mother called me in the summertime. He was from Detroit, and she begged me to take him back. She said he doesn't have a father. He needs discipline. You're the only hope he's got. And I said, but he had that chance. He's 19 years old and he blew it. And she said, Coach Shilts, please, I beg you to take him back. So I called him in the next day, and the first thing I said to him is, you need to get down before you go to bed tonight. You need to get down on your hands and knees. You need to pray to God to thank him for giving you a mother like you've got. Because I am going to give you a chance next year, but I'm not giving you a scholarship. You're going to have to earn it. If you earn it, you can get it later. We'll reimburse your tuition. I said, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for your mother. And he said, Coach, thanks a lot. He played a whole next year and played successfully, and then went to University of Detroit. I think he hung around on their team, on their as a substitute for a year, but he didn't finish that. He wasn't that good, but he was pretty good. He was good enough for us. So when I think of those stories, there's so many of them. That's where I have my pride. That's where the fact that somebody else thought I won a lot of games and they put me in a Hall of Fame, or they name an award after me. I think if I had to pick, probably the award would mean the most because it's more than just winning games.
All right, final question. If you could go back and if it was possible for you to go back to talk to yourself when you first got into coaching, what advice would you give yourself?
Uh, I would say probably a combination of the things that we've already talked about. Realize that if you're if you're a good coach, that doesn't mean you're a good father. If you're a good coach, doesn't mean you're a good husband. Uh, don't take it so seriously, because I've learned that when I left KVCC. They had a great team this year at KVCC. They ended up like 27-2. Um, and I go watch a game, and then I realize that there's only 250 people, 300 people there, maybe one side of the bleachers is not even out. They seat 1,700, so they don't have 850 there. For the big games, they might have 600. Most of the people in Kalamazoo, the Gazette doesn't even, I mean, Channel 3 doesn't even carry their scores. So it was my job out there consumed me. And I still wanted to be a good father. I still wanted to be a good husband. I still went to Fellowship of Christian Athletes things and didn't expect any money. People asked me what I charged to give speeches, and I said, whatever you can afford. If you can't afford anything, I'm still going to come. I mean, I did what I felt God wanted me to do. Um, but I still think when I look at the the passion that I had for doing it, um, I don't think there was anything wrong with the passion. But when I would come home after a game and I would sit in my front room until 2:30 in the morning grading the film and then get up and go teach a class at 8 o'clock or get up early and go in and be exhausted during practice. And I wondered how much time I had left for my kids. I had 5 kids and I was letting the job. And here's the thing that really made me aware of that. About I don't know, 2 months after I retired in 2011, I went back to KVCC to get the box scores. I had kept, in fact, your stepdad actually kept some stats for me when he was at KVCC. Every game I coached for 32 years, we had a box score afterwards, even when it was done manually. And when we had to tally up sheets and add up the rebounds and stuff, I had filed them starting with 79 and 80 all the way through 2010 and 11. So there were several drawers in a file cabinet. I went back in there because somebody had asked me if I had the box score for a game they played in. So I said, yeah, I've got it. I went back out there. Somebody at KVCC had emptied out that entire file cabinet and thrown all those away. And my wife just lit into me. She said, so you think it was that important? I don't know if I've answered all the things. I rambled a lot. I talked longer than I should have. I see we've gone about an hour and a half. So you'll have some editing to do.
Yeah, just thanks for this conversation. I thought it was really good. So thank you for sharing all of your life.
I hope yeah, I hope it was what you were looking for.
All right. All right. It's ad time. Today's episode is in partnership with Daily Jam, this show's first sponsor. Daily Jam is my personal music playlist project. We are currently on Daily Jam 7. The way it works is I add one new song every single day, 365 days a year, 366 on leap years, with no repeats. The standard for the songs is in the name. Every song, I believe, is good enough to be played on repeat all day long. My personal Daily Jam. humbly and respectfully, I have incredible music taste. So if you're curious about this or just interested in what kind of music I listen to, check the link in the description to listen to any Daily Jam playlist. I guarantee you will find songs you love and gems you've never heard before. Thank you to Daily Jam for being a sponsor of today's episode.